New exhibit debuting today is highlighting one of the most unique aspects of New Orleans culture, social aid and pleasure clubs.
And as part of our observance of Black History Month, Tan Trung previews an exhibit celebrating the culture of celebration.
Parades and second lines are often what we associate with social aid and pleasure clubs. But the Historic New Orleans Collection is aiming to place these Black organizations in a cultural frame.
During the 19th century, they did a lot of community-based work, social services, providing social services like health care, end-of-life care, funerals and burials.
Through a network of photographers and material from the various clubs, Dancing in the Streets is an exhibit dedicated to something that is uniquely New Orleans, and more specifically, unique to its Black people.
And that was really important to us as part of our methodology to create this polyvocal approach that is not us as the museum telling the story or photographers telling the story.
A member of the Sudan Social Aid and Pleasure Club explains the significance of parading after a long week of work.
8 hours a day working to have that one little day to as those little 4 hours where I can hear some nice music and express myself through dancing. It means a lot.
That audio is part of the exhibit's telling of the rich history of Black mutual aid societies. Founded in the 19th century, the club supported African Americans and Afro-Creoles. Even during times of struggle, they paraded. This is a late 1950s photo of the Zion Banner Benevolent Association of Lower Algiers during its Labor Day parade. On the first anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, this second line was one for the history books.
This part of the exhibit takes us behind the scenes before the parades hit the streets. Then, as we progress through these images, it captures the energy of the parade on the street, and in this case, the energy above it.
The exhibit is dedicated to Sylvester Francis and Ronald Lewis. They died within months of each other last year. Francis founded the Backstreet Cultural Museum and documented so many celebrations. His cameras are now on display. Lewis founded the House of Dance and Feathers. This is his pink streamer from the Big Nine's 13th anniversary parade. Before COVID, following the music in New Orleans often led you to a street party. When you follow the path of this exhibit, it'll lead you to the purpose behind them. Tan Trung, Eyewitness News.
Dancing in the Streets can be viewed at the Historic New Orleans Collection at 520 Royal Street in the French Quarter. The exhibit runs until June 13th. Beautiful.